Welcome back. This video reviews our load development practices and applies them to a new cartridge for my 30-06. I'll get into why I chose the .6 toward the end of the video, but suffice it to say, it's still, after all these years, a fantastic caliber. First off, the gun. This is a Browning X-Bolt Hunter in 30-06 with a 22-inch 1-in-10 button-rifled barrel and a hand-reamed chamber. She comes in at a lightweight 6 pounds 12 ounces, but the recoil is quite forgiving with Browning's Inflex recoil pad. My first exposure to the .6 was Dad's old Winchester, which was an absolute bruiser, but the X-Bolt is a breeze. I've shot over 70 rounds in one day and still had a shoulder left over without any pain. Woohoo! The action is glass-bedded into the stock at front and rear action screws, as well as the recoil lug, for a true free-floating barrel. Operation of the bolt is super smooth with a short 60-degree bolt lift, critical for those follow-up shots that I hope I never need. The only bummer is that the muzzle thread is M13 by .75 instead of 5/8 by 24, so my Sako can't share the same direct thread for my suppressor. But the radial muzzle brake that comes stock with the rifle provides excellent stability. The scope is a VX5HD 2-10 by 42 by Leupold with a red dot to aid in low light, a basic hunting scope, with second focal plane. With 39 MOA on the dial, I can still get out quite far without holding over. Eventually I'll get a CDS cap. Referring back to our load development steps, I've chosen a caliber, and I've chosen a bullet, the 178gr ELD-X. To choose a powder, I started with some basic questions. Which powders are readily available? Which of those have the lowest feet per second per 10th grain charge? And which of those offer the highest velocity for the bullet chosen? Using load data from Hodgdon's website, I did some simple maths for the powders we had on hand. H4350 offered a max velocity of 2798 with a feet per tenth of 4.64. Stayball 65 offered a max velocity of 2857 with a feet per tenth of 4.20. Big Game showed a max of 2768 with a feet per tenth of 3.91, the lowest speed density on the list, and H4831 had a max of 2710 with a feet per tenth of 4.40. Stayball Match and Varget were also considered with a feet per tenth of 4.48 and 4.50 respectively, but were ruled out due to much lower max velocities, both below 2700. So I loaded up 10 rounds each of the chosen powders at a full grain below max, to be shot in 2 groups of 5. And I discovered that Hodgdon has pretty spicy load data for H4350. Even at 1 grain below max, there were ample pressure signs, including hard bolt lifts, ejector stamping, and flattened primers. Turns out Hornady load data for H4350 only goes up to 55.3 grains at 2650 feet per second, while Hodgdon goes up to 57.5 grains at 2798. I was shooting 56.5 at 2804. This is a prime example of why we start testing at a full grain below max charge. I shot only 5 of the 10 rounds loaded, and took down the rest to use later for H4831, which was ultimately rejected due to lower max velocity. But SD, ES, and group size were sufficiently good to keep H4350 as well as Stayball 65 as options for further testing. Big Game showed no pressure signs at all, so despite a somewhat lesser performance, it was kept in the running. Next up came modified charge ladders in 0.3 grain increments at the higher end of the charge range. Yeah, 5-shot groups don't satisfy the Statisticians Guild, but it's a good starting point without blowing out the barrel just to find a load. Verification with 10 to 20-shot groups follows our initial charge ladders. The results showed good performance for all 3 powders at max charge weights, or at least as max as I could go without pressure signs. H4350 at max Hornady data, Big Game at max Hodgdon data, and Stayball 65 at 1.2 grain below max Hodgdon data. Since I was already using H4350 for my 212 grain ELD-X load, I decided to continue with that powder for seating depth testing. Up to now, testing had been done with bullets seated 20 thousandths off the lands, a good depth for most of our rifles. But my Browning prefers the 212s at 17 thousandths, so it was time to test this for the 178s. Again, starting with 5-shot groups, 4 depths were tested using 55.3 grains of H4350, 23 thousandths, 20 thousandths, 17 thousandths, and 14 thousandths off the lands. Seating depth testing revealed a clear preference by my barrel for 20 thousandths off the lands with this load. This load was also used to test ballistics gel at 400 yards to compare the 178 ELD-X in 308 versus 30-06, but more about that later. I had also planned a 20-shot group of this load and seating depth to verify my choices, but after cleaning my barrel, I aborted it. Despite cleaning after the last outing and this one, bore scoping revealed that my barrel was twice as fouled with copper and carbon as usual. I had to use ISO paste to get down close to bare metal again. My 212 load doesn't produce near that amount of fouling and is a lot less smoky to shoot. An interesting finding that informed my final choice for this rifle. So about the 308 versus the .06, let's look at some terminal ballistics. We've met a lot of folks who say the 308 is ample for big game and doesn't ruin as much of the meat. They say the .06 is outdated, no longer useful. But it's kind of like how people say the 9mm is better than the 45 for self-defense. Yeah, it's a little faster to shoot and carries more rounds, but if I'm hunting Roosevelt elk or defending against a 250-pound drug addict, why take the chance of a multi-shot kill? And if I'm hunting elk, I'm in bear country too. Personally, I want something in my hands that can take down the big grizzles and moose as well. Gel testing at 400 yards using the 178 grain ELD-X, which has a G1BC of .552, shows much better terminal performance out of the .06 compared to the 308, and flight trajectory is also better. Can the 308 shoot the 212? Yes, but Hornady load data maxes out at 2,400 feet per second, while I'm getting 2,550 with the .06. Maximum bullet weights for these calibers are 220 grains for the 308 and 225 grains for the 30-06, with max velocities of 2,250 and 2,500 respectively. The 308 simply poops out sooner. The 308 does exhibit better terminal performance than my 6.5 PRC at 100 yards, as shown in our last video, but the latter is more accurate at long distance. So how do I choose which rifle to take with me on excursions? Big game under 500 yards in the woods? My 30-06 with a simple hunting scope. Small game on the far open plains? My 6.5 PRC with a precision quality scope. And unspecified targets, my 308 AR-10 with a mid-range scope. This matches my particular comfort level when it comes to ethical kills and use cases, but the same load development strategy applies to each. As a side note on testing methodology, when using a pencil barrel, slow way down. I saw more variation in shot placement than I expected at the pace I was going, 90 seconds between shots. By the time I extended it to 3 minutes, it was too late. My barrel was just too warm. Since I'm using the .06 for hunting anyway, with a cold bore shot followed by a fast second shot if needed, I decided to test my 212 grain load again in 2 different groups. The first group of 5 shots were cold bore only. The second group of 5 shots were follow-up shots on a different target. Group sizes were acceptable with no need to adjust my point of aim despite the center of the second group being low and left. In the heat of the moment, adjusting for point of impact on the follow-up is a tough game to play on a moving target, and I'm very fortunate to have a great hunting companion. After all this, for my next load development in this rifle, I'll either start with 3 full minutes between shots in the same group, or run doublets, 5-shot groups on 2 targets in pairs, 10 rounds for each ladder of the test. Find the strategy that works best for you on your own bench, for your own hunts. Keep testing and perfecting, and keep records. Don't duplicate my load. If you want to duplicate anything, duplicate how I came to my load. It's the process that's important. Every rifle, even if the same make and model as another, will require its own unique bullet and powder combination. Rifles have feelings too, you know. See you in our next video, and as always, thank you for watching. Dang it. It's always that third shot.